In today's video, Trove News is going to look at the rise and rise of fossil fuels. My name's Mike Cooper, Managing Director of Trove for Subsurface. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the recently published Statistical Review of World Energy. Now this comes from the Energy Institute. They took over from BP. It's really been trying to look objectively at data in the energy community since 1952. This is the 2025 variant, and the last full year would be, of course, 2024. Now, we're going to look at oil, and we're going to be looking in barrels, and gas, we're going to be looking in billions of cubic feet. There are metric versions available. You can actually download the data for yourself, but we've kind of brought it together graphically so that people can just take a quick look and get a feel for what's happening. So without any more ado, here's oil. So if we start by looking at oil reserves, and this was a figure from 2020. The most recent reserves numbers are broken out for 2020. Venezuela, clearly the top. Saudi Arabia, the second. By far and away the biggest countries for oil reserves, with sort of Canada, Iran, Iraq coming in the third, fourth, and fifth. Now look down the list there. In all of these, I've tried to pick out Norway and the United Kingdom as sort of bellwethers. They aren't particularly significant in terms of reserves, but the numbers they're quoted there in billions of barrels, and that's at the end of 2020. Total proved oil reserves. Now, if we look in terms of the reserves to production ratio, this is a figure which assumes that if countries go on producing at the rate that they're producing in the most current year, divide that by the number of reserves they have, actually the other way around, reserves divided by production, then we get a view of how long they might be producing for. Now, it's going to change, of course it is, but what we did here was we put a line on, and well, this is 2020 data, so if we look forward, say, 30 years, that's taking us to 2050, where the aspiration is to be at net zero. Well, let's have a look what it might look like in 30 years. I'll guarantee it won't look like this in 30 years, but here we go. The red dotted line there takes out all the countries to the left. They will not be producing. There's our bellwethers, Norway and United Kingdom in red. They certainly won't be producing oil out to that stage. In fact, only 15 countries are likely to be producing at that time. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait. Russia doesn't quite make it. USA doesn't make it. United Arab Emirates will. Libya, well, their production is so low and the reserves are so high, they've got an astronomically large R over P ratio. Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Qatar, Vietnam, South Sudan, possibly other Africa. Well, that's a combination of countries there. Yemen, Syria, again, with civil wars and things, their production levels are very, very low for the reserves they have remaining. Chad, Sudan, Uzbekistan, Tunisia. So really largely Middle Eastern and some African countries. They would be the only ones producing if reserves stay the same and production volumes stay the same, which I'll guarantee they won't. But there you go, an interesting look. Many countries do have little remaining reserves using this yardstick. So if we look at the reserves to production ratio 2020, this is the change between 2020 and 2000. So over that 20-year period, again quoting in billions of barrels, we're looking at changes in proven oil reserves. Now, if it's less than one, either an increase of one or a decrease of 1 billion barrels, we've ignored those countries. So clearly, top of the list here, Venezuela, 227. What's all this about? Well, it certainly hasn't been that Venezuela has been out and found all this oil in the 20-year period. Rather, it's been a reclassification that took place, and so it allowed all of the Venezuelan heavy oils, which previously it had discounted or disallowed. So, real adds here, well, Iran, USA, with, of course, that'll be shale oil or oil shales. Saudi Arabia, significant. They're still actively exploring. They too have found unconventional deposits, which they are now starting to exploit. Iraq, again, a country with major reserves adds. some ongoing exploration, certainly some finds over this 20-year period, and so on down the list. You can see those there. Now our bellwethers, here's the United Kingdom here. There are 2.2 billion barrels less reserves in 2020 compared to 2000, and Norway 3.5 billion barrels less. The big losers, Canada and Mexico. So if we look at oil reserves over time, there hasn't been a reserves update since 2020. So countries like Guyana, which has seen a lot of recent production and reserves offshore in the Stabroek block, Suriname's going to be coming along soon. Namibia, hopefully we'll see some production soon. So there have been some ads. Mozambique, probably not yet covered in the data, but they are going to be coming along soon. We can see the total here over time, and this is in thousands of millions of barrels, or if we could put that another way, 1.6 trillion barrels of oil here. So the numbers have gone up since 1980 here, a number, well, let's call it 700 for cash, and here up to 1700, so more than doubled in the period of time. Reserves gone up, they've plateaued once, they look like they may be kind of plateaued again. However, still at or about an almost record high. And so we kind of say, well, reserves, oil reserves, they're just gone up. Maybe a minor little decrease in the last year or two, but overall trend increase. There's more oil reserves today than there's ever been. Now, this is the highlight from the Energy Institute report, and one of their highlights said oil prices continued to fall from their 2023 levels following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, though on average they fell by -3%. They remain 27% above their 2019 pre-COVID levels. Well, I put this in here because oil prices affect reserves, and so this sort of falling away of average oil price is probably accounting for this minor downward revision in global reserves. If we look in terms of oil production, again, we've looked at all the countries that are covered by the Energy Institute report. The US leads the way. Now, the number here, we're going to come back on that, 20 million barrels a day. So Saudi Arabia, 10, nearly 11. Russia, nearly 11. And then you can follow on down, Norway, United Kingdom picked out there, all the way down to the bottom. These figures from Energy Institute, they include crude oil, shale oil, oil sands, condensates, NGLs, LPGs, and naphtha separated from the production of natural gas. When I saw this, I didn't recognize this number here for the US. And in fact, we'll come on to the next slide. But before we get there, there's the US was the world's largest oil producer, accounting for a fifth of global production in 2024. Its production is now broadly equal to the combined output of Saudi Arabia and the Russian Federation. Again, these aren't numbers that I instantly recognize. In fact, if we look at the EIA, the number here from the US Energy Information Administration, they show a number here, and this is monthly US production of crude oil in millions of barrels per day. You can see here around about 13. This is the sort of number that I'm used to seeing. So not entirely clear where the Energy Institute, why they've adopted a difference. And this would be comparable with the 10.5 type numbers you're getting for Russia and Saudi Arabia, or 11, I think was the number. So more like it. Again, USA just at an all-time high in terms of its oil production. Now, oil consumption. This is the other side of the coin. What people forget is they blame the oil and gas companies for producing these fossil fuels, but they're only producing it because the demand is there. Where is the demand there? Well, top of the list, US, then China, India, Saudi Arabia, Russian Federation, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, and so on down the list. The United Kingdom, way more consumption than Norway, mainly because Norway has a much smaller population. But the numbers again, 16 million barrels for China there, and nearly 19 million barrels for the United States. If we look at oil consumption over time, there was a big dip here associated with COVID, but right now the consumption, well, it's at an all-time high. It's currently 101 million barrels per day. Energy Institute said, having initially rebounded following COVID, all regions exhibited either a slowing down or a plateauing in oil demand in 2024. Well, the number's still going up. OECD demand remained flat, non-OECD demand grew. Africa and Middle East were the fastest growing regions. China displayed signs of oil demand peaking in 2023. Well, China's put a lot of investment into renewables, solar and wind, and various other energy forms. Global demand for fuel oil and diesel gas oil fell. China's, with an increase in LNG fueled trucks, demanded less demand for diesel. However, globally, demand increased for jet, kerosene, methane, and LPG, and gasoline. So, transportation making quite a contribution to this. Now, if we move on and look at gas. So the picture for gas reserves in 2020, these numbers in trillions of cubic feet. Russia at the top there, lots and lots of remaining gas. Iran, Qatar, the North Field, Turkmenistan, and huge amounts of onshore gas reserves in Turkmenistan, USA, China, Venezuela, and so on down the list. Find your country of interest down there. Norway and the United Kingdom. United Kingdom sort of less than Bolivia, Brunei, Peru, Yemen, and Syria, but slightly more than Mexico, Papua New Guinea, Thailand, Netherlands, Bangladesh. It's gone a long way down the curve or down the listing since the North Sea was a prolific producing basin for gas. Now, we came across this infographic online and it came from World Visualized. Now, in their listing here, top 10 countries with natural gas reserves in trillion cubic feet. They have Russia, Iran, Qatar. And if you look at the Energy Institute numbers, Russia, Iran, Qatar. But if you compare the two slides, USA and Turkmenistan change position, and some other differences and changes. What's very noticeable is the fact that the numbers are quite different, and I haven't really been able to get to the bottom of this. But again, staying with the Energy Institute, they've got that 1,320 trillion cubic feet as opposed to the World Visualized 1,688. Now, that difference, 368 TCF, it's actually bigger than the reserves of all of these countries listed here, all of them put together. So the difference between them that's quoted is really quite enormous. Now, in terms of gas production, well, we've got US producing the most. This is BCF per day. There's billions of cubic feet per day. Almost 100 BCF per day. Russia second with 61. Iran 25, China 24, and so on down the list. Norway still producing quite a lot of gas. The UK's gas very much lower. Now, Energy Institute, one of the highlights, global natural gas production rose to, they quote a number there in billions of cubic meters, with the largest producers being the US, Russia, Iran, and China, who together account for 53% of total global production. Over the last 10 years, China has gone from being the world's sixth largest gas producer to its fourth. Its domestic production now meets 56% of its domestic demand. They still have to import an awful lot of gas. So here's the total world gas produced by year. And this is the number for 2024. The total is 397.96 billion cubic feet a day. Now, I've kind of drawn three lines there. There seem to be, that red line seems to be a pretty good fit for 1970 up to around about just shy of 2000. But then from 2000 on up to COVID or pre-COVID times, you see a gradient increase, so that the growth in gas was accelerating. And if we've got enough data points there in that last red section, we can see perhaps, yes, perhaps it has slowed down in recent years post-COVID, but we'll wait and see if this trend is established for some time or if it's just about going to kick off again. So that's the look at production worldwide. If we look now in terms of consumption, well, there's basically almost linear growth, isn't there, versus time. That's from 1965 up to 2024. There has been a couple of impacts there. The global financial crisis in 2008 is this little dip in here, and then there's COVID in there. Demand for gas is at an all-time high. What Energy Institute say in their highlights, they say global natural gas demand returned to growth in 2024, rising 2.5%. Its share of global fossil fuels stood at 29%, and it met a quarter of total global energy demand. All regions bar Africa saw gas demand rise in 2024. Asia Pacific saw the largest increase. China represented nearly 70% of that. The CIS, the sort of former Soviet Union, Russia, and etc., and North America witnessed quite large rises, while Europe, well, it experienced only a modest increase. The consumers, well, the biggest consumers here, USA, top of the list. That's a blow up on the right hand side here. Here's the full listing, but probably a little bit difficult to read. So let's just have a look at the big consumers. They are USA, Russia, and China. And here's the UK here, sort of towards the top. Is it just outside the top 10? But you have to go all the way down here to Norway. And there's a reason for that. One, population is not that large. And secondly, Norway uses an awful lot of hydro to get its power from, so not the same demand for gas. In fact, it exports most of its gas to other countries in Europe. So, a takeaway from this, well, with a exception of minor changes of fluctuations, perhaps to do with pricing than anything else, which suggests maybe in the last year or two, oil and gas may not be quite as high, but overall, reserves are going up, production is going up, consumption is going up. Doesn't matter whether it's oil, doesn't matter whether it's gas. So all the efforts and all the COPs we've had and all the talk, well, it doesn't seem to have made a huge difference, does it? The statistical review, it doesn't really cover plans and aspirations of various companies. Now, this article here, which comes out of oilprice.com, talks about several major oil producing countries: UAE, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Guyana. They're all expected to expand production. Emerging countries like Namibia and Suriname, for that matter, which kind of might be very light sort of condensates or very light oils, they too will be adding production in the near term. Even climate forward nations like Norway plan to maintain high oil and gas output until at least 2035. They're the facts. You can challenge the numbers, but they're the numbers that come from the Energy Institute's statistical review. Now, as for coal, well, don't get me started on coal. Coal is by far and away the worst fuel for carbon emissions, and we'll cover those in a future video. So if you want to know more about Trove databases, just email us. Subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, like us, all the general stuff. Put in a comment. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? Thanks for watching. See you back on our channel before too long. Bye for now.